Major funding for this Read 180 workshop is provided by the National Science Foundation, America's investment in the future.
Intel Corporation is a proud supporter of PBS. The Intel Innovation in Education Initiative provides teachers with the resources to inspire their students and encourage them to unlock their potential.
At Jif Peanut Butter, we know just how choosy you are when it comes to your family, including the shows you value most. Public television encourages kids' curiosity and love of learning, and Jif is proud to support Cyberchase on behalf of all choosy moms and dads.
And by a ready-to-learn television cooperative agreement from the U.S. Department of Education through the Public Broadcasting Service.
And by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. This program was also made possible by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome to Workshop 9, The Front Lines of Justice. Only 50 years ago, some states in the American South still had laws that kept black people segregated, separate from white people. Blacks, who were often referred to as colored back then, and whites, had separate restrooms, restaurants, schools, even water fountains. By the 1950s, many people were fighting back to end segregation, and this struggle is known as the Civil Rights Movement. Over the next few weeks, you'll be discovering some of the people who were on the front lines of the battle for civil rights. You'll meet Martin Luther King Jr., one of the most important leaders of the Civil Rights Movement, and learn about one of the first times he was discriminated against because he was black. You'll experience the movement through the eyes of 5 young African Americans who lived through the excitement, the struggles, and the violence of the era. And you'll read a poem about one of 4 young girls who was killed when the opposition to the movement turned deadly. The video story will introduce you to some of the heroes of the Civil Rights Movement, like Rosa Parks, a courageous woman who dared to say no when a bus driver ordered her to give up her seat to a white passenger. Her simple act of defiance showed how one person can make a difference. So let's go back to the late 1950s and 60s, the years that changed America forever. Reading 1, Angry Young Man. Martin Luther King Jr. was one of our country's most influential civil rights leaders and an organizer of the largest U.S. civil rights protest ever, the 1963 March on Washington, D.C. Hundreds of thousands of people gathered to demand equal rights, and Dr. King gave his most famous speech.
I have a dream. My 4 little children one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today.
Sadly, King was killed before he could see his dream come true, but he left behind an amazing record of accomplishments in the struggle for civil rights. In this reading, you'll learn about an early experience that helped inspire King to devote his life to the fight for equality. Reading 2, In Their Own Words. During the Civil Rights Movement, thousands of black people and white people fought together against unfair laws. They marched in demonstrations to demand equal rights for African Americans. They sat in at restaurants that didn't serve blacks. Protesters called Freedom Riders took bus trips through the South, stopping to visit places where blacks weren't allowed. Often, the protesters faced violence. At times, things got so bad that the U.S. Presidents Kennedy and Johnson had to send government police to protect them. In these historical documents, 5 African Americans share their memories of the era. As teenagers, they witnessed beatings, bombings, and mob violence directed at civil rights protesters. One young woman went to jail for joining a march to demand voting rights for black people who were often prevented from registering to vote. Many of these brave young people helped change the country. Reading 3, Ballad of Birmingham. In the city of Birmingham, Alabama, reaction to the civil rights movement was often violent. Angry mobs shouted at protesters and threw rocks and bricks. The police used attack dogs and powerful fire hoses to break up marches. And one Sunday in 1963, white racists set off a bomb inside a black church, killing 4 little girls. Poet Dudley Randall wrote about the bombing in his poem Ballad of Birmingham. Dudley grew up in Detroit, Michigan, where his first poem was published in a local newspaper when he was 13. As an adult, he wrote hundreds of poems about African American people and issues. Ballad of Birmingham is written as a conversation between one of the young bombing victims and her mother. The mother will not allow her daughter to go downtown because of all the violence. The mother is sure, however, that her daughter will be safe in church. Ballad of Birmingham by Dudley Randall. Mother dear, may I go downtown instead of out to play and march the streets of Birmingham in a freedom march today? No, baby, no, you may not go, for the dogs are fierce and wild, and clubs and hoses, guns and jails aren't good for a little child. But Mother, I won't be alone. Other children will go with me and march the streets of Birmingham to make our country free. No, baby, no, you may not go, for I fear those guns will fire. But you may go to church instead and sing in the children's choir. She has combed and brushed her night dark hair, and bathed rose petals sweet, and drawn white gloves on her small brown hands, and white shoes on her feet. The mother smiled to know that her child was in the sacred place, but that smile was the last smile to come upon her face. For when she heard the explosion, her eyes grew wet and wild. She raced through the streets of Birmingham, calling for her child. She clawed through bits of glass and brick, then lifted out a shoe. Oh, here's the shoe my baby wore. But baby, where are you? One of the most important events of the civil rights movement began on an ordinary city bus. When an African-American woman in Montgomery, Alabama refused to give up her seat to a white passenger, her actions launched a protest that shook up the entire nation. Check out this video story to learn about some key events and people of the civil rights movement. The Road to Equality. Montgomery, Alabama, 1955. On a December evening, Rosa Parks was taking a city bus home from work. The bus got crowded, and the driver ordered her to get up so a white person could sit down. But Rosa refused to move. She was tired of being pushed around by racist people and racist laws, and she said no. The police came, pulled her off the bus, and arrested her, but her protest didn't end there. Black people all over Montgomery joined Rosa Parks in a citywide bus boycott, refusing to ride or spend their money on buses. Instead, they walked, took taxis, and shared rides in each other's cars. And they kept it up until the law was changed and blacks and whites had the same right to any seat on the bus. One of the leaders of the boycott was a 26-year-old preacher, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Dr. King stood for peace. He believed in a type of protest called nonviolent resistance. That meant standing up against unfair treatment, but never using violence to get your way, even if the other side used violence against you. King led his followers in acts of civil disobedience, which means disobeying laws that are unjust and going to jail for it if necessary. Even when King's own house was bombed, he continued to preach nonviolent forms of protest.
I don't mind coming to jail. I don't mind suffering at all. And I will suffer some more just for my freedom.
By the late 1950s and early 60s, acts of civil disobedience began to spread. Black college students staged sit-ins at lunch counters and confronted white restaurant owners who refused to serve black people.
Can I be admitted?
No, sir, you cannot be admitted.
Why?
I am not going to serve you.
Because of my race?
I'm not going to serve you.
Because of my race.
Move on.
Black and white freedom riders rode buses through the South together, going places that were supposed to be for whites only. Across the country, huge groups of people held demonstrations, marches, and protests, carrying signs and giving speeches demanding civil rights for African Americans. But some white people were angry and determined to enforce the racist laws.
You've got to keep the white and the black separate.
The anger soon exploded into violence. Police turned dogs and powerful fire hoses on demonstrators. The Freedom Riders buses were set on fire. Churches were bombed, many people were injured, and many were killed. Federal troops, soldiers from the U.S. government, had to be sent in to protect people. But African Americans didn't stop protesting until they won their civil rights. Eventually, the civil rights movement accomplished many of its goals. In 1964, President Lyndon Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act, which outlawed segregation. And in 1965, he signed the Voting Rights Act, which gave African Americans equal rights to voting. It took great leaders like Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King Jr. and thousands of ordinary people to win the fight for equality.